He thought it was just another routine stop, but that night, he grabbed something that would change everything. The rain fell in a thin, steady drizzle, turning the city street into a mirror of blurred lights and restless motion, as Officer Daniel Mercer stepped out of his patrol car with the kind of confidence that came from years of never being questioned, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose as his eyes locked onto a lone figure standing under a flickering street lamp, Nia Brooks, calm, composed. Her phone resting in her hand as if it were nothing more than an ordinary device, but to Mercer, something about her presence didn't sit right, or at least that's what he told himself, because in his world, suspicion didn't need proof, it just needed a target, and tonight she was it. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need to see that phone," he said, his voice carrying authority that echoed louder than the distant traffic, and when she didn't immediately respond, when she simply looked at him with a quiet steadiness that felt almost out of place, something in him shifted from procedure to control. "No," he added, sharper this time, as a few bystanders slowed their steps, sensing tension in the air. Nia took a slow breath, her voice even, measured. "Officer, I don't believe you have the right to access my personal device." But Mercer didn't hear rights, he heard resistance, and resistance, in his mind, meant guilt. Within seconds, his hand closed around the phone, pulling it from her grip with a casual force that suggested he'd done this before, the screen lighting up in his hand, reflecting against his face as he began scrolling, dismissing her words, dismissing her presence, dismissing the quiet dignity she carried. "Let's see what you're hiding," he muttered, unaware of the subtle shift happening beyond what his eyes could see, because as his thumb moved across the screen, a faint symbol flickered for just a fraction of a second, something unfamiliar, something precise, something that didn't belong in the world he thought he controlled, and yet he ignored it, because to him, it was just another phone, just another person, just another moment he could dominate without consequence. But Nia didn't move, she didn't protest louder, she didn't reach for the device. Instead, she watched him, not with fear, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, certainty, the kind of certainty that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't break, and in the distance, unnoticed by the growing crowd, a black SUV slowed as it turned onto the street, its headlights cutting clean through the mist. While somewhere far beyond the city, in a room filled with quiet urgency, a screen flashed red, a single line appearing across it, unauthorized access detected, and a voice, calm but unmistakably serious, spoke into the silence. "We have a breach." Back on the street, Mercer kept scrolling, still convinced he was in control, still unaware that every second his hand remained on that phone, the balance of power was shifting in ways he couldn't yet understand. And then, finally, Nia spoke again, her voice low, steady, almost gentle. "Officer, you should really stop." But he didn't, and that was the moment everything began to change. Mercer barely glanced at her as he continued scrolling, his thumb moving faster now, more confident, as if every swipe confirmed what he already believed, that he was right to stop her, right to take control, right to dig deeper. But the phone did not behave the way he expected. There were no simple messages, no familiar apps, just layers of encrypted folders, unfamiliar icons, and strings of data that looked more like code than conversation, and for a brief moment, something flickered across his face, not doubt, not yet, but confusion, quickly buried under the same arrogance that had carried him this far. "You think this makes you look important?" he said under his breath, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "All this fancy nonsense." But the words felt thinner now, less certain, because the longer he held the device, the less it resembled something he understood. Behind him, a woman in her 60s, Lorraine Bell, lifted her phone and began recording, her eyes narrowing as she watched the exchange unfold. She had seen enough of these moments to know when something was not right, and this, whatever this was, felt different. Nia remained still, her hands relaxed at her sides despite the tension pressing in from every direction, her breathing steady, her gaze fixed not on the phone, but on Mercer himself, as if she was measuring something deeper than his actions. "Officer," she said again, her tone unchanged, calm but carrying a weight that did not match the situation. "That device is protected under federal authorization." Mercer let out a short laugh, shaking his head as if dismissing a child's excuse. "Federal, huh?" he replied, glancing briefly at her before turning his attention back to the screen. "Everyone claims that when they get caught." But the phone responded again, a soft vibration, followed by a warning that appeared for less than a second: access restricted, authentication failure, and then it vanished, replaced by a blank interface that seemed to reset itself. Mercer frowned, tapping the screen harder this time, trying to force a response. But nothing happened. The silence from the device felt heavier than any error message, as if it was no longer cooperating, as if it had made a decision of its own. Across the street, the black SUV came to a complete stop, its engine still running, its presence subtle but deliberate. Two figures inside watching without moving, without speaking, waiting. Back on the sidewalk, the air shifted in a way that was difficult to explain. Conversations from the crowd softened, footsteps slowed, even the rain seemed quieter, and still. Mercer stood there, unaware of the growing weight around him, unaware that somewhere far beyond his reach, systems were adjusting, signals were being traced, and a chain of responses had already begun. "You are interfering with something you do not understand," Nia said, her voice low enough that only he could hear it clearly now, and for the first time, he hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, his grip tightening slightly around the phone as if trying to reassert control. But control was already slipping, not in a way he could see, not yet, but in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. And then, from inside the SUV, a door quietly opened. The door of the SUV did not slam, it did not announce itself, it simply opened with a quiet precision that did not belong to the chaos of a city street, and from it stepped a man in a dark coat, his posture straight, his pace unhurried, the kind of presence that did not demand attention yet somehow pulled every eye toward him. Mercer noticed him only for a second before dismissing it, just another bystander, just another person watching, because in his mind, nothing had changed. He still held the phone, he still controlled the moment, but something in the air had shifted, something heavier now, something that made even the faint hum of traffic feel distant. Nia saw the man the moment he stepped out, her eyes following him with a recognition that she did not show on her face, not a smile, not relief, just a subtle stillness that deepened, as if the outcome had already been decided long before this moment. Mercer cleared his throat, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping in. "You keep talking like you are important," he said, his voice louder now, almost defensive. "But all I see is someone refusing a simple check." He lifted the phone slightly, as if presenting evidence to an invisible jury, but the screen remained blank, no data, no access, no response. It was no longer reacting to him at all, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Behind him, Lorraine Bell took a small step closer, her phone steady as she recorded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something is not right here." And a few others nodded, sensing it too, that quiet shift where control begins to slip but has not yet fallen. The man from the SUV approached the edge of the scene and stopped, not interfering, not speaking, just observing, his gaze moving from Mercer to the phone, then to Nia, as if confirming something already known. Mercer noticed the look, and for the first time, irritation gave way to a flicker of unease. "You got something to say?" he called out, his tone sharper, trying to reassert authority. But the man did not respond. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat and revealed a small badge, not raised high, not flashed dramatically, just held where it could be seen by the right eyes, and Nia's gaze lowered slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Mercer squinted, trying to make sense of it, the shape, the insignia, unfamiliar yet official in a way that did not match anything in his training. "What agency is that?" he asked, his voice no longer as steady, but the man still said nothing, because the answer was not for him, not yet. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate, and in that silence, Mercer felt something he had not felt in a long time, not fear, not fully, but the beginning of it, the kind that starts as doubt, the kind that asks a question he did not want to hear. What if he was wrong? What if this was not what he thought it was? And before he could push that thought away, the phone in his hand vibrated again, longer this time, stronger, the screen lighting up not with data, but with a single line of text that appeared in bold, unmistakable letters, Federal override initiated. Mercer froze, just for a second, his eyes locked on the words, his mind trying to catch up, and beside him, Nia finally stepped forward, her voice calm, steady, and now impossible to ignore. "I told you, officer," she said quietly. "You should have stopped." The words on the screen did not disappear, they stayed there, steady and undeniable, as if the device itself had taken control of the moment, and Mercer's fingers, once so certain, now hesitated just above the glass, his grip no longer as firm as it had been seconds ago, because this was no longer a simple search, no longer a routine stop, and somewhere deep down, even before he fully understood it, he felt it slipping away, the control, the narrative, the certainty he had walked into this situation with. "What is this?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, his voice lower now, almost cautious, and for the first time, he looked at Nia not as a suspect, but as a question he could not answer. But she did not rush to explain, she did not raise her voice or step back into the spotlight. Instead, she stood there with the same calm presence, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged. As if she had already moved beyond this moment, while he was still trying to catch up to it. The man from the SUV took another step forward, his shoes barely making a sound against the wet pavement, and this time, when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that did not need volume to be heard. "Officer," he said evenly, "that device is no longer within your jurisdiction." Mercer turned toward him, the tension in his shoulders tightening. "You cannot just walk up here and tell me what I can or cannot do," he replied, but the words lacked the edge they had before, as if even he could hear the shift in his own tone. The man did not argue, did not escalate. He simply reached into his coat again and this time held the badge up just enough for Mercer to see clearly, not long, not dramatically, just a moment, but it was enough. Mercer's eyes narrowed, trying to process what he was seeing, the insignia, the detail, the level of clearance that did not belong to local authority, and behind that badge was something else. Something heavier, the kind of authority that did not explain itself because it did not have to. The crowd grew quieter, the faint murmurs fading into a tense silence as people began to realize that this was no longer an ordinary encounter. Lorraine Bell lowered her phone slightly, her expression shifting from curiosity to realization. "Oh my God!" she whispered under her breath, as if she had just stepped into a moment that would not stay small for long. Mercer swallowed, his jaw tightening as he looked back down at the phone, the words still there. Federal override initiated. They did not blink, they did not fade, they remained, constant and unmoved, and in that stillness, the weight of what he had done began to settle, not fully, not all at once, but enough to crack the confidence he had been holding on to. "You should return the device," the man said calmly, not a command, not a threat, just a statement that carried more certainty than anything Mercer had said all night, and for a moment, Mercer did not move, the rain tapping softly against the hood of the car, the city continuing in the distance as if unaware of the shift happening on this small stretch of street, and then, slowly, almost reluctantly, his hand lowered just a fraction, his grip loosening, not because he wanted to, but because something in him finally understood that this moment no longer belonged to him. And beside him, Nia took a small step forward, her voice quiet but final. "This is where it changes, officer," she said, and for the first time, he believed her. Mercer's fingers finally released their tension, not all at once, but enough for the phone to slip slightly in his grasp, as if even the device no longer recognized his authority. And in that small movement, the shift became undeniable, the moment he had controlled just minutes ago now standing on the edge of something far beyond him. "Take it," he said, though the words came out uneven, as if they did not belong to the same voice that had commanded the scene earlier. But Nia did not reach for it immediately. She let the silence stretch just a second longer, letting him feel it, the weight of what had changed, the presence of something larger than either of them now filling the space between them, and only then did she step forward, her hand steady as she took the phone back without force, without urgency, as if reclaiming something that had never truly left her control. The screen dimmed for a brief second before lighting up again. This time with a clean interface, stable, restored. As if whatever had been disrupted was now corrected from somewhere unseen, Mercer watched closely, his eyes narrowing, searching for something he could still understand, some detail he could hold on to. But there was nothing familiar left in this moment, nothing that fit the rules he had relied on for years. The man from the SUV stepped closer now, standing just within reach, his presence calm but unmistakable. "For the record," he said, his voice level, "that device is part of an active federal operation." Mercer's head turned slightly, his jaw tightening again, but this time it was not defiance, it was resistance against the realization he did not want to accept. "You are telling me she is federal?" he asked, but even as he spoke, he knew it was more than that. The answer came not from the man, but from Nia herself, who finally met his gaze fully, no longer just observing, but addressing him directly. "I am not just federal," she said quietly, her tone measured but firm. "And what you accessed tonight was not just private." The words settled between them with a precision that cut deeper than any raised voice could have, and for a moment, Mercer said nothing, the street around them holding its breath, the faint glow of the streetlights reflecting off the damp pavement, the distant sound of traffic continuing like nothing had happened. But here, everything had shifted. Lorraine Bell lowered her phone. Completely now, her expression no longer curious but certain, as if she understood the importance of what she had just witnessed. "This is going to matter," she murmured more to herself than anyone else. Mercer exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping just enough to reveal what had been hidden beneath his confidence. Uncertainty, not loud, not dramatic, but real. "What happens now?" he asked, and the question, simple as it was, carried a different weight than anything he had said before, because, for the first time, he was no longer directing the moment, he was inside it, waiting for an answer. The man from the SUV glanced briefly at Nia, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, and then he spoke, not harshly, not with authority forced, but with clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "No," he said. "We document everything." The words hung in the air, steady and final, and Nia looked back at Mercer one last time, her voice calm, almost quiet, but carrying a truth he would not forget. "Every action leaves a record," she said. "You just chose the wrong system to test it on." And in that moment, the balance was no longer shifting, it had already changed. The rain did not stop, but it no longer felt like background noise, it felt like a clock, steady and quiet, marking the seconds as everything settled into a new order. Mercer stood still, his hands now empty, his posture no longer commanding but uncertain, as if he had stepped into a space where the rules he knew no longer applied, and for the first time, he looked around, really looked, at the faces in the crowd. At the phone still raised, at Lorraine Bell who had not moved, her gaze fixed on him not with anger, but with something heavier, recognition, the kind that says this moment will not disappear. Across the street, the second door of the SUV opened, and another figure stepped out, followed by a third, both dressed in the same quiet precision, their movements coordinated without being obvious, as if they had done this many times before. The man beside Nia glanced toward them briefly, then back at Mercer. "This interaction is now under review," he said calmly, and the words landed differently than anything before, not as a threat, but as a statement of process, something already in motion, something that did not need permission to continue. Mercer shifted his weight, his mind searching for something to say, something to hold on to. "I was doing my job," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded smaller than they had ever sounded before, because the moment he spoke them, they were no longer enough. Nia watched him carefully, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, but with a clarity that did not bend. "Doing your job does not mean ignoring boundaries," she replied, her voice calm, controlled, every word measured. "And it does not give you the right to decide who belongs and who does not." The statement did not rise in volume, but it carried further than anything shouted could have. It reached the people watching, it settled into the space between them, and it stayed there. Mercer opened his mouth again, but nothing came out, because there was nothing left that fit the moment, nothing that could undo what had already been set in motion. One of the agents approached slowly, holding a small device, not pointed, not intrusive, just present. "We are collecting environmental footage and device logs," he said, his tone neutral, professional, and as he spoke, the faint glow of his device reflected briefly against Mercer's uniform. Capturing everything without asking, the crowd shifted slightly, not closer, not further, just enough to show they understood that this was no longer just something to watch, it was something being recorded in a way that would last. Lorraine lowered her voice, almost to herself. "This is not going away." And the truth of that statement hung in the air, steady and undeniable. Nia glanced down at her phone for a moment, her thumb brushing lightly across the screen as if confirming something only she could see. Then she looked back up, her expression unchanged, composed. But there was something else there now, not relief, not tension, but resolution, as if the outcome had reached the point it needed to reach. The man beside her nodded slightly, a silent signal. And then he turned back to Mercer. "You will be contacted through your department," he said, "and this will proceed accordingly." Mercer swallowed, his throat dry, his mind racing through possibilities he could not yet fully grasp, and in that moment, standing under the dim streetlight with the rain falling steadily around him, he understood something he had never had to face before, that power does not disappear all at once, it fades in the presence of something stronger, something quieter, something that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. And as Nia turned to leave, her steps calm, unhurried, she spoke one final time, not looking back. "Next time, ask before you assume." And the words did not echo, they settled, because they did not need to be loud to be remembered. The street did not return to normal after she walked away, even though the cars kept moving and the rain kept falling, because something had been left behind, something heavier than noise or light, something that settled into the space like a truth no one could unsee. Mercer remained where he stood, his eyes following Nia for a moment longer than he intended, as if trying to understand how someone who had said so little had managed to change everything. But she did not look back, not once, her figure moving with quiet certainty toward the waiting SUV, the door opening for her before she even reached it. As if the world around her adjusted without needing instruction, the agents followed in silence, their presence already fading into the background the way it had arrived, precise and controlled, and within seconds, the vehicle pulled away, its tires cutting softly through the wet pavement until it disappeared into the flow of the city, leaving Mercer standing under the dim glow of the streetlight with nothing but the echo of what had just happened. The crowd did not rush in, did not speak loudly, instead they lingered, their voices low, their eyes still on him, because now he was the center of something different, not authority, not control, but consequence. Lorraine Bell stepped forward slightly, her phone still in her hand though she was no longer recording, her expression calm but firm. "You should have listened," she said quietly, not accusing, not angry, just stating what had become obvious to everyone. Mercer did not respond, not because he did not want to, but because the words no longer came the way they used to, the certainty behind them gone, replaced by something slower, heavier, the realization that this moment would not stay on this street, that it would move, travel, expand beyond this night. He glanced down at his hands, empty now, as if expecting to still see the phone there, but there was nothing, and that absence felt louder than anything else. Behind him, his patrol car sat with its lights still flashing, the red and blue reflecting off nearby windows. But even that felt different now, less like authority and more like a reminder. The radio on his shoulder crackled faintly, a voice calling his badge number, asking for status, and for the first time, he did not answer right away, he just stood there, listening. The question hanging in the air longer than it should have, because he did not know how to respond, not in the way he had before, not in the tone that assumed control. Finally, he reached up and pressed the button, his voice lower, measured. "I am on scene," he said, but the rest of the words did not come, because there was no simple way to explain what had just unfolded, no quick summary that fit into a report. Across the street, a man shook his head slowly, another woman whispered something under her breath, the moment already beginning to shift from event to memory. But not the kind that fades, the kind that stays, that gets told again, that gets shown, that gets reviewed. Mercer exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest settling deeper, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the difference between holding power and understanding it, because one can be taken in a moment, but the other reveals itself when it is already gone, and as the rain continued to fall, steady and unchanging, he realized that this was not the end of what had happened, it was only the point where it would begin to follow him. The flashing lights were still spinning when Mercer finally turned back toward his patrol car, but the rhythm that once felt familiar now seemed distant, almost disconnected from him, as if the badge on his chest and the authority it represented had been quietly separated from the man wearing it. He reached for the door handle and paused, his reflection staring back at him through the rain-streaked window, distorted by water and light. And for a brief moment, he did not recognize the expression. Looking back, it was not confidence, not control, it was something quieter, something unsettled. Behind him, the street had begun to empty, the crowd dissolving into the night, but not before carrying pieces of what they had witnessed with them, pieces that would not stay contained. Lorraine Bell lingered a few seconds longer than the rest, her eyes meeting his one last time before she turned away, not in fear, not in anger, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew that what had happened would not be forgotten. Mercer opened the car door and slid inside, the familiar scent of worn fabric and plastic filling the space, but even that felt different now, like stepping into a place that no longer fit the same way. The radio crackled again, louder this time, calling his name with more urgency. "Officer Mercer, report status," the voice repeated, and he closed his eyes for just a second before responding. "Situation resolved?" he said, but the words felt incomplete the moment they left his mouth, because nothing about this felt resolved, not really. The system inside the car began to log his interaction automatically, timestamps, location data, body camera sync, everything aligning into a digital record that did not forget, did not overlook, did not reinterpret, just stored, exactly as it happened, and somewhere in that process, the same moment was being mirrored in another system far beyond his reach, one he had never considered before tonight, one that did not rely on his version of events. His hands rested on the steering wheel, still for a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for a signal that would tell him how to proceed, but no such signal came, only the quiet hum of the engine and the steady tapping of rain against the windshield. He started the car slowly, pulling away from the curb with less urgency than usual, the city unfolding in front of him like it always had, but now every street light, every passing face, every reflection in the glass seemed sharper, more aware, as if the world had not changed, but his place in it had shifted slightly, enough to notice, enough to feel. Across town, in a secured operations room, screens lit up with lines of data, timestamps aligning with the exact second his hand had touched that device. A digital trace mapped out with precision, a timeline that told a story without emotion, without bias, just fact. Agent Julian Cross stood behind one of the monitors, his expression focused, his voice low as he spoke to someone off-screen. "We have full capture," he said, and the words carried a finality that did not need emphasis. Back in the car, Mercer adjusted his grip on the wheel, his mind replaying the moment again and again, the look on her face, the words she had chosen, the silence that had followed, and with each replay, the same realization settled deeper, that what he had taken for control had been something else entirely, something temporary, something fragile. And now, as the city lights stretched out ahead of him, he understood that this night was not over, not for him, not in the way that mattered, because some moments do not end when you leave them, they follow, they wait, and eventually, they ask to be answered. The city felt quieter as Mercer drove, not because the noise had faded, but because something inside him had shifted, filtering everything differently. Every passing car, every red light, every reflection in the side mirror now carrying a weight he could not ignore. His hands stayed firm on the wheel, but his thoughts moved faster than the road ahead, replaying every second of that encounter, not the way it happened, but the way it looked from the outside, the way it would appear on a screen, stripped of his assumptions, reduced to actions and reactions, and for the first time, that perspective unsettled him more than the moment itself. His radio remained silent now, but the silence did not bring relief. It felt like a pause before something inevitable. Something already set in motion. Across town, the operations room. remained active, screens updating in real time, each frame of footage aligned with metadata, body camera angles synchronized with environmental recordings, a complete reconstruction forming without gaps, without interpretation, just a sequence of undeniable facts. Agent Julian Cross stood with his arms folded, his eyes fixed on the playback as Mercer's voice echoed softly through the speakers, clearer now. Detached from the moment, revealing tone, choice, intention in a way that could not be reshaped. Mark the point of initial contact, someone said from across the room, and a timestamp blinked into place, precise down to the second. Back in the patrol car, Mercer slowed at a red light, the glow casting a steady color across his face, and in that stillness, he noticed something he had not before, his body camera indicator still blinking, recording, capturing even now, not just the event, but everything that followed, every second after. The continuation of a story he no longer controlled. He reached up instinctively, his fingers hovering near the device, but he did not turn it off. Something stopped him, not fear, but understanding, the kind that comes when you realize that ending the recording does not end the record. His hand dropped back to the wheel, the light turned green, and he moved forward, but the weight remained, not on the road, but in the realization that the moment had already extended beyond him. Across the city, Nia Brooks sat in the back of the SUV. Her posture relaxed but her attention focused on the phone in her hand, the screen now stable, secure, a quiet confirmation that the system had recalibrated. Agent Cross glanced back at her briefly. "We recovered integrity," he said, his voice low, professional, and she nodded once, not as relief, but as acknowledgement, her eyes moving across the data displayed in front of her, lines of code, access logs, the exact second Mercer's interaction triggered the alert, every detail mapped, every action recorded. "And the interference?" she asked, her tone even, and Cross replied without hesitation. "Fully documented." The words carried no emotion, but they did not need to, because the meaning behind them was already clear. Back on the road, Mercer passed under another street light, the reflection briefly illuminating his face, and in that light, the shift was visible, not dramatic, not sudden, but present, the beginning of something he could not reverse, his mind no longer asking if it would matter, but how much, because deep down, he knew the answer was not small. The system he had trusted to support him was now observing him. Not as an officer, but as a subject within its record, and as the miles stretched ahead, one quiet truth settled in, steady and unshaken. Some actions do not fade with time, they sharpen, they clarify, and eventually, they return, not as memory, but as accountability. The road stretched ahead in a long line of dim streetlights and quiet intersections, but Mercer no longer drove with the same rhythm he once did, every turn now feeling slower, every stop lasting just a second longer than necessary, as if his body was adjusting to a reality his mind had not fully accepted yet. The patrol car's system continued its silent work, logging location, speed, timestamps, each detail folding into a record that was already far beyond his control, and somewhere in the background, the same data was being mirrored, analyzed, placed into context he could not see, could not influence. Inside the precinct, the night shift carried on with its usual routine, officers moving through reports, phones ringing, the low hum of fluorescent lights filling the space. But in one office, the atmosphere was different, quieter, more focused. Captain Elena Ruiz stood near her desk, a screen glowing in front of her as she reviewed incoming footage, her expression unreadable but sharp, the kind of focus that did not miss details. Beside her, another officer shifted uneasily, watching the playback as Mercer's voice echoed through the speakers, clearer now, stripped of the urgency of the moment, revealing tone in a way that felt heavier when heard again. "Pause it," Ruiz said calmly, and the screen froze on a frame where Mercer held the phone, his posture rigid, his expression certain. She did not react immediately, did not speak, she just looked, as if measuring not just the action, but everything around it, the context, the timing, the choices made in seconds that now stretched into something much larger. "When did this come in?" she asked without turning. "Approximately 12 minutes ago," the officer replied, his voice lower than usual, aware of the weight in the room. Reese nodded once, her eyes still on the screen. Then she reached forward and rewound the footage slightly, watching the moment again, slower this time, as if searching for something beneath the surface, something that explained how a routine interaction had shifted into something else entirely. Across town, Mercer turned onto a quieter street, the buildings lower, the traffic thinner, but the silence only made his thoughts louder, his grip on the wheel tightening slightly as the memory replayed again, the words, the look in her eyes, the way the moment had slipped from his control without warning. He glanced briefly at the dashboard, the faint reflection of his own face staring back at him, and for the first time, he did not look away quickly. He held the gaze, as if trying to understand the person behind the uniform. Back at the precinct, Reese let the footage play forward again, the moment where the badge appeared, the shift in tone, the subtle change in Mercer's stance, and she exhaled slowly, not in frustration, not in surprise, but in recognition. "Contact Internal Affairs," she said, her voice steady, final, and the words did not carry anger, they carried process, the kind that moves forward whether anyone is ready for it or not. The officer beside her nodded immediately, already reaching for the phone, because in that room, there was no hesitation, no debate, just a clear understanding that this was no longer a question of interpretation, it was a matter of record, and records, once created, do not disappear. Back in the patrol car, Mercer slowed as he approached the precinct, the building coming into view under the dull glow of overhead lights, and as he pulled into the lot, one quiet realization settled deeper than all the rest, that the place he was returning to would not feel the same. Not tonight, not after what had already begun, because some doors do not close behind you, they wait, and when you walk back through them, everything on the other side has already changed. The engine idled for a second longer than necessary before Mercer finally turned it off, the sudden silence inside the patrol car pressing in around him in a way that felt unfamiliar, heavier, as if the absence of noise had made room for everything he had been trying not to think about. He sat there with his hands still on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead on the precinct building, its fluorescent lights casting a pale glow across the lot. A place he had walked into countless times without hesitation, without thought, but tonight, something held him back, not physically, not visibly, just enough to make him pause, as if stepping out of the car meant stepping into something already waiting for him. Inside the building, Captain Elena Ruiz stood exactly where she had been, the footage still looping on the screen, each replay sharpening the details, each frame reinforcing what could no longer be explained away as routine. She did not rush, did not react impulsively, she simply watched, the kind of attention that turned moments into evidence. Beside her, the call to Internal Affairs had already been made, quiet, efficient, the process unfolding without announcement, because it did not need one, it never did. Mercer finally opened the car door, the cool night air brushing against him as he stepped out, the sound of his boots against the pavement softer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. The walk from the car to the entrance was not long, but tonight it stretched, each step carrying a weight that was not there before. The automatic doors slid open with their usual mechanical hum, but as he walked inside, conversations shifted, not stopping completely, not dramatically, just enough, just a slight change in tone, in volume, in awareness, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but is felt all the same. A few officers glanced in his direction, then looked away, not quickly, not nervously, just deliberately, as if they had already seen something he had not yet fully faced. Mercer moved toward his desk, his posture controlled, measured, but there was no urgency in his movements now, no sense of command, just motion, quiet and contained. As he set his keys down, the faint sound echoed louder than it should have, or maybe he was just hearing it differently. Captain Ruiz stepped out of her office then, her presence steady, her expression composed, and when her eyes met his, there was no anger there, no raised voice waiting, just clarity. The kind that does not leave room for misunderstanding. "Officer Mercer," she said, her tone even, professional. "I need you to come with me." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than any command he had followed before, and for a brief second, he stood still, not because he did not hear her, but because he understood what those words meant in a way he never had to before, not as instruction, but as transition. He nodded once, a small motion, controlled, and followed her down the hallway. the familiar walls now feeling narrower, quieter. The hum of the lights louder against the silence between them. They reached the office, the door already open, and inside, the screen still displayed the moment, frozen, unmistakable. Mercer stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes drawn to it immediately. The image of himself holding that phone, the posture, the certainty, captured in a way that left no room for explanation, no space for reinterpretation. Reese stepped to the side, allowing him to see it fully. "This has already been reviewed," she said calmly. "And it has already been forwarded." She did not need to say where, he already knew. The room felt still, not tense, not loud, just final, and as Mercer stood there, looking at the version of himself he could no longer step away from, one quiet realization settled deeper than anything else, that this was not the moment where things changed, this was the moment where the change became visible. The image on the screen did not move, but it did not need to, because everything that mattered was already there, fixed in place, unchanging, undeniable. Mercer stood still as his eyes traced the details he had not noticed before, the angle of his posture, the firmness in his grip, the expression that now looked less like control and more like assumption, and the longer he looked, the less it resembled the version of himself he believed in. Captain Reese did not interrupt the silence, she allowed it to settle, to stretch, because this was not a moment for explanation, it was a moment for recognition. "The footage is clear," she said finally, her voice calm, steady. "And it aligns with multiple sources." She did not list them, she did not need to. Body cameras, civilian recordings, system logs, all of it already connected, already forming a single narrative that did not depend on interpretation. Mercer exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on the screen, as if looking away would change nothing, but staying would at least make it real. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, and for the first time, there was no edge in his voice, no defense, just a statement that felt incomplete even as he spoke it. Reese nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the words. "Intent does not erase impact," she replied, her tone unchanged, the kind of response that did not argue, did not accuse, but also did not leave room for denial. Mercer's shoulders lowered slightly, the tension no longer held in place by certainty, but replaced by something quieter, heavier, understanding beginning to take shape, not all at once, not fully, but enough to shift the ground beneath him. Reese stepped closer to the desk, her eyes moving briefly to another screen where additional data scrolled, timestamps, access logs, synchronized records that matched the moment frame by frame. "This has already been escalated," she continued, "and it will be reviewed outside this department." Again, no explanation needed, the process was already in motion, and it would not slow down for anyone. Mercer nodded once, his eyes finally leaving the screen, but the image did not leave him, it stayed clear and sharp, as if it had already become part of something permanent. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, the same question he had asked before, but now it carried a different weight, not uncertainty about the moment, but about what came after. Reese met his gaze directly, her expression steady. "Now you step back," she said, "and the process moves forward." There was no anger in her voice, no punishment delivered in tone, just a clear line drawn between what had been and what would follow. Mercer stood there for a moment longer, absorbing the words, not resisting them, not questioning them, just letting them settle, because for the first time, there was nothing left to push against, no version of the situation that would return things to what they were before. And as he turned slightly, preparing to leave the office, one final realization settled into place, quiet but firm, that this was not about a single action anymore, not about a single moment on a rainy street. It was about the record that moment created, the way it would be seen, reviewed, understood, and remembered. And in that understanding, something deeper became clear, that power is not defined by what you can take in a moment, but by what remains when that moment is over. And as Mercer stepped out of the office, the door closing softly behind him, the screen inside remained unchanged, still showing the same frame, still holding the same truth, because some images do not fade, they wait, and when the time comes, they speak for themselves. The hallway outside the office felt longer than it had before, not because the building had changed, but because Mercer had, each step echoing just a little louder in his ears as he walked past desks and conversations that no longer seemed meant for him. No one stopped him, no one called his name, and yet the silence carried more weight than any confrontation could have, because this was not about a moment anymore. It was about what that moment had revealed. Across the city the night continued without pause, traffic flowing, lights shifting, people moving through their routines unaware of the quiet shift that had already taken place. But in a secured operations room far removed from the street where it began, the final report was being compiled, every frame aligned, every timestamp confirmed, every action placed exactly where it belonged in a sequence that told its own story without needing interpretation. Agent Julian Cross stood near the monitor, his eyes scanning the completed file, and beside him, Nia Brooks remained still, her focus not on the screen, but somewhere deeper, as if she was measuring not just what had happened, but what it meant. "It is done," Cross said quietly, and the words did not signal victory, only completion. Nia nodded once, her expression calm, unchanged, because for her, this was never about winning, it was about truth, and truth did not need celebration. It only needed to be seen. Back at the precinct, Mercer reached the exit and paused just before stepping outside, the glass door reflecting his image once more, clearer now, sharper, and for the first time, he did not look away from it. He held that reflection, not with defiance, not with denial, but with recognition, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to hide behind. Outside, the rain had stopped, the pavement still damp under the streetlights, the air quieter, as if the city itself had settled. He stepped out slowly, the cool air brushing against him as he stood there for a moment, not moving, not rushing to the next thing, just standing in the space between what had been and what would come next, because now he understood something he had not before, that authority is not measured by how easily it can be used, but by how carefully it is held, and when that balance is broken, it does not shatter loudly, it shifts quietly, leaving behind a record that cannot be undone. Across town, Nia stepped out of the vehicle, the building ahead of her lit with a steady glow, her phone resting securely in her hand, no longer interrupted, no longer questioned. She paused for a brief second before walking forward, her steps calm, certain, as if nothing about her had changed, because it had not. She had not raised her voice, she had not forced a moment, she had simply let the truth stand where it always was, and that was enough. The door opened for her, and she walked inside without hesitation, leaving the night behind as it continued on without her, and somewhere between those two places, one quiet truth settled, steady and unshaken. He thought he was searching for something hidden. But what he found was something higher, something that did not need to be defended, because it was already beyond his reach, and in the end, the badge he wore could not define the moment, because that night, the moment was defined by something else entirely, something that does not shout, does not force, but always remains, waiting to be seen, waiting to be understood, waiting to remind anyone who forgets that justice does not arrive loudly, it arrives precisely, and when it does, it leaves nothing behind but the truth.